Hello, it's your friend Emma. Today I am delighted to have Brad Johnson and David Smith with us. They are next level famous. So buckle up, listeners. This is a great episode. David, I've got big bios and introductions for David and Brad, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because I know they'll do a better job than I will. But all I want to say is, as I read through their introductions, which tell me they have almost spent a lifetime doing this work, doing the work of building a better workplace, building a better world. And in New Zealand, we have a Te Ao Māori concept. So the Māori people are the indigenous people of New Zealand. And there's a concept which is called be a good ancestor. And I just want to introduce David and Brad as people who are being great ancestors. And I want to acknowledge that. Today we're going to talk about their latest book, which is called Fair Share, How Men and Women Can Create a More Equitable Workplace Together. You know that when I have a lot of post-it notes, I have loved this book, and I have indeed. But welcome, Brad and David. Brad, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, what a delight to be with you today, Emma. I am a clinical psychologist by training. I spent my career as a clinical psychologist at the Naval Academy, and I'm now professor emeritus there. And also spent some time at Johns Hopkins in the kind of clinical education program. All of my research has been in mentoring and sponsoring relationships and what those look like when they're very effective. And that really led me to my collaboration with David. When he joined me at the Naval Academy, we began noticing that our interests were aligned. And so that has set us on this journey of researching male allyship and better inclusive leadership. So, yeah, so that's it.
Welcome. Thank you. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Emma. And I think I'm just going to leave it at your introduction of being next level famous. I don't think you've ever been called that before.
It's hard to top. Yeah.
It's hard to beat. It's great to be with you, and thanks for having us. And so I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins in the Carey Business School, and I'm also the co-director of the Gender and Work Initiative, one of our centers there at the Carey Business School. And I'm a sociologist by background, and I do all of my research in the area of gender, work, and family issues. And as Brad said, we met and we began our collaboration when we were both teaching at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. And my previous career, academia is my second career. My previous career, I spent over 30 years in the U.S. Navy as a Navy pilot. So it's an interesting connection in terms of coming out of a very male-dominated profession like the military and coming into this work that we do, which has shaped a lot of our perspectives and where our focus lies today.
So interesting. Yeah, we'll pick up on that. Thank you very much, David. I just want to pick up on something Brad said in his introduction, which I loved, which is, when you both first met, you noticed that you shared some common things. And I just want to pick up on this word notice. I think it's such a underrated leadership capability at home and at work. And my other big fangirl is for Eve Rodsky. And I really learned that from Eve's work, which is we need to be noticing what's happening at home and at work, right? And I also have seen that in your work as well, this whole noticing idea.
Yes. Yeah. Paying attention when it comes to interpersonal relationships like mentorship. Dave and I have written about noticing high talent people around you, right? And then immediately beginning to think about, well, how might I contribute to their development or next level opportunities?
Yeah. And lots of the previous work that we did for our second book, which was Good Guys, that is all about looking at and understanding some of the best practices when we think of what women really appreciated and who they considered to be male allies. And a lot of it was this of noticing the discernment, being attuned to what was going on around them, developing situational awareness of how others may be experiencing the workplace very differently than they were, and then doing something about it, taking that and using it. And so to us, that's real leadership.
Love it. I love that. Fair share. Fair share. How men and women can create a more equitable workplace together. I've got some specific questions on the book, and for everyone who hasn't read the book, I would recommend getting it. It is a fantastic, it's not just a book where you read it and you're like, oh, that's interesting. It's a book that has a practical roadmap for you as a leader, even as someone who's interested in change. But I'm wondering, you have written a couple of books. You guys are both very busy. What made it important to write this book?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it really speaks to part of where Brad started with a little bit of our journey in this work area. And our first book, as Brad mentioned, really focused on mentoring and sponsoring, and really how do we engage men and doing better mentoring and sponsoring and be more effective as that. And in terms of also diversifying their networks of who they're mentoring and who they're being mentored by. Same thing with sponsoring. That was Athena Rising, our first book. Interestingly, that book came out about a year before Me Too went widespread around the world. And it changed the context of the conversations we were having with leaders and organizations about what was important in terms of what they were trying to do with shifting workplace practice and behavior and culture, and really shifted it from this mentoring, sponsoring conversation into much more about allyship. And it was a fairly new term. This is back in 2017. Where allyship wasn't quite as widespread from a gender perspective. It had been around for several decades in other contexts, but not from a gender perspective. So we set out to do the research for that and really to learn and understand from women what they considered to be great allyship and what were those behaviors and practices. And that is the research that led to our second book, Good Guys. Interesting, Good Guys really was divided up into kind of three key areas of actions and behaviors as we think of them. The first being the interpersonal, which includes mentoring. The second part, which was a large focus of the book, was really about what we think of as public allyship. I think doing the great advocacy work, not just formal sponsorship, but more broad-based advocacy in your organization for people maybe who don't look like you. And then also doing the confrontation, the disruption when you see something, hear something is not right. It might be biased or sexist in some way. And then how do we speak up in the moment and speak up when those people aren't there, especially like when women aren't in the room in that case. The third part of the book is where we connect into fair share. And that was where we began to talk about systemic allyship and really how do we begin to shift and think about changing structures around work and practices that don't work for women. And in many cases don't work for men either. And that's one of the things that we found in Good Guys was that really as we begin to change some of these practices in the workplace that were focused on women and removing barriers or improving women's experience in the workplace, it also improved it for men too. And it wasn't just about work, it also overlapped with family in a lot of ways. And that's where we decided that there was something more to this, that we really needed to really do a deep dive when it came to what are those practices? How did businesses and organizations, how did leaders work together to really understand what worked for their employees and for their business and for their employees consider themselves to be as caregivers, right? And their family roles that they have as well. And that's really what got us to fair share. It took us a little longer to get to the actual book being published because as it turns out, there's a lot of great practices out there. There's a breadth of different perspectives around the size of an organization, from small businesses to large global corporations, to different industries and occupations related to that. And so we wanted to make sure we were doing it justice by covering the breadth of that work.
Do you want to add anything to it, Brad?
No, that's precisely it.
You guys are a polished double act anyway now, so you probably... Yeah, I mean, when I hear you talk that back, David, for me, it's like, as both of your work has progressed, you started more with individuals or, what can we do? And then you're moving more into like structural or, and I see that in my work as well, is that I'm an executive coach and I coach, but also I run workshops and programs for mums and dads. And what I see is, I've predominantly worked with individuals and helped individuals to navigate a system that was never designed for what they were all
Yes.
doing in it.
Yeah.
But increasingly, what I can see is that particularly dads are butting up in the workplace against something that I love your description of, which is a granite wall. Your opening line in the book is today's workplace is broken. Well, I mean, truth. Like, and I have seen this, there's no one winning in this workplace, and couples hit a granite wall when they try to disrupt the status quo. And I totally agree with that. But my question to you is, there are so many studies, papers, research, statistics on the commercial advantages of having a gender fair workplace, of being able to have equity at work. What is at the heart of the stuckness that I see organizations in? Like they might have changed their policies, but have they changed their culture? What's at the heart of the stuckness? Because I'm kind of sick of research that says it's good business practice to do this, so you should all be doing it, because these rational levers aren't driving change. What's at the heart of the stuckness?
Yeah, well, I hope we have 3 hours set aside and to really address this. There are so many things. Dave and I in Fair Share write about this archaic workplace, that we call the 20th century workplace, and I think that really kind of fits. This is a workplace that was created by our great grandfathers, predominantly by men to do men's work, right? Everything is kind of centered around men with the assumption that those men have a stay-at-home partner who's taking care of all the unpaid domestic labor. That was really kind of the template for creating the modern workplace. And sadly, it hasn't changed, even though couples have changed, families have changed. All of the data shows that today, nearly all couples want to have an egalitarian relationship, meaning often they both want to share in caregiving and employment, and they want an opportunity to do well in both of those domains. Most of those couples require dual income to survive, right? It's just to sustain, our household, we both need an income. So the archaic workplace never changed, even though both attitudes and couple structures, family structures have changed significantly. So that's kind of the crux of it. If you ask, what are the sticking points in terms of leaders in a lot of modern organizations, I think there are a few things. Number one, a lot of those leaders succeeded, came up in an organization where that structure was the template. So it worked for me, right? If I'm a guy who looks like me, in his 60s, and I've kind of made it to the top of my career, well, that worked for me. So I can't imagine a workplace that can be structured differently. And maybe I have a failure of imagination around that. A lot of these leaders don't look at the data. You mentioned a lot of the data on what works and the value opportunity of creating a more gender fair workplace, but they don't interrogate that data. They don't look at it. There's so much inertia in our practices and policies. It's just easier to keep doing the same thing. Those are a few of the things.
Yeah.
But Dave, what am I
Yeah.
missing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the rigidity of senior leaders today, who we know from, again, the research shows us that most of these CEOs today are white men, and they have stay-at-home wives, and they think that that's normal, and that's what the rest of their workforce is, and that's not the case. And it doesn't
Mm.
that structure that might have worked for them, even if they were in that family structure at that point in their careers early on, that it doesn't work today for people. Most families are those dual career, dual earner families. They need two paychecks to make it
Mm.
work for most of us out there today. And the fact is that, most people have families. It's
Mm.
just part of what
Yep.
comes with it, right? And
Yeah.
expectations around what family life looks like, and as a parent, what that means for me and my involvement. And the workplace is set up for something else. It's set up for this ideal
Yeah.
worker that's totally devoted and committed to doing their work, 24/7 availability. They have a stay-at-home spouse who takes care of the home and the kids and other domestic responsibilities. That is not the world we live in.
Yeah. I mean, I totally hear what you're saying. You know, is it a failure of imagination? Is it just not the world I grow up to be a senior leader in, so I can't imagine it? I had a client this week she's in a dual career couple. Her husband has been made redundant, so he is looking for another job.
Hmm.
And flexibility is important to him, and he's had it in his previous jobs. And in every job interview he has gone into, when he has inquired about flexibility, they have said, well, what does your wife do? And my client, who is the wife, has never had the question when she's talked about flexibility, what does your husband do? And I said to her, this is what we're talking about, this inbuilt granite wall of, I mean, I don't know whether it's unconscious bias or what it is, because my view is most people are good people, as you said in The Good Guys, right? Like, but it's this fog that's descended on people.
Yeah, well, there's so much implicit bias here, Emma, and this is just it's so calcified we don't even recognize it. But when we think of caregivers, right? I know that's kind of where you center a lot of your work. But if you say caregiver in the workplace, most people have a cognitive image, typically of a mother, right away. Therefore, all of our policies, our benefits packages for caregivers, people going on paid leave, whatever it may be, tend to be female centric. We assume that only women are going to use these. And so men get cut out of that opportunity. Even if my company has parental leave or caregiving leave that is available for men, the company's not ready to give me that benefit. So my manager may come to me when I request it and say, hey, buddy, you've got a wife at home. Why are you asking for this? Or this is for women who go on
Yeah.
maternity leave. What's your
Yeah.
problem? Right? And so if
Mm.
men are getting that feedback, we can't be
Mm.
surprised when they feel stigmatized, they feel reluctant to ask for equal benefits, and so they're not caring equally at home.
And you don't even have to look very far for the examples. I mean, it was all over the news here not too long ago when a world class level football player in the World Cup playing
Mm.
for Belgium wanted to go on, was going to take his paternity leave, wanted to be there for when the baby was born, his first child. And all of the pushback, it didn't necessarily come from his team or his coaches, but from the world stage. And so it just goes to show you how ingrained. And this wasn't necessarily from the United States either. This is from other countries outside the U.S. And so it's not a regional issue, right? This is a world issue in terms of how we perceive men and women's roles and what they should and should not be doing.
Totally. And, oh, how hard this is for dads to butt up against the
Mhm.
system. And I really agree with you, Brad, that when we see the word caregiver, we think mum. When we see the word parent, we often think mum as well. And I really like the point in your book about employee resource groups and how we really need to think about dad groups. And I know that might sound hard to get across the line in your organization, but when I hear both those stories, I think we need spaces where dads can get collective power from each other on how to face into this granite wall. because
Yeah.
like and like that, and I also want to say that if you are a mum listening to this, just to bring curiosity to this conversation, because I want to put my hand up and say for a long time I kind of hated on dads. Like
Yeah.
I just was like, they've got it easy. I'm kind of carrying everything. And what I realized, my change is we don't get anywhere if we think that. We have to be curious about others' lived experiences. And I know it sounds crazy that we need an empowering men program, but we kind of do.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I love your comment about the ERGs and inviting men in very deliberately. But in addition to that, Emma, we have to have senior male exemplars role modeling this, right? They need to join these ERGs. They need to invite other men in. They need to take their full paid parental leave. They need to request flexible work. If senior men aren't role modeling this, then I'm afraid we have a long way to go to change a lot of those, biases and the stigmatization when men do ask for those kind of equal benefits.
I totally agree. And I also loved your point around senior men who are, sponsoring or leading these groups to actually stay for the whole session. I remember I came and did a talk once, and the big C-suite guy that was the head of this network was like, "I'm just going to pop in, introduce you, and then I'm going to leave."
Yep.
And I thought that's very telling.
Very telling. Yep.
What's
Yeah.
what's important and what's not.
Yeah. And also, like, it's kind of like tick the box stuff. Let's
Mm.
put it on our website that we've got one of these groups, but I'm very busy. I don't just have time for this.
Yeah. This is how you kind of sniff out a performative organization when it comes to gender fairness versus one that has embedded this into their core values and practices.
Mm, mm. Just backing the truck up a bit, I really loved your emphasis on having the right language. And I really am interested in this word fair share, because some people would talk about an equitable workplace, but how would you define a fair share? What is the point of having the language of fair share? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We found ourselves as we were thinking about the title of the book and working with our editors on the title that that terminology was there all along, and it just took a little while before it just kind of popped out to us from a title perspective. But to us, the way we were using it when we were writing the book and the way others were talking about it was really in kind of really two different perspectives, and one is from women's perspective of being able to have access to or earn or availability of getting to their fair share when it comes to money, to wages, to compensation, to promotions, to advancement, right? This paid work perspective for women in many ways. And the same thing, as we flip the coin, we go to the other side for men, and it was about men having the ability to do their fair share of caregiving, of domestic responsibility, doing their fair share of these tasks that, again, a lot of men want to be doing, and they're frustrated. In many ways, they're conflicted because they can't find a workplace that allows them to lean into and step into those roles in the way that they really want to. And so you have these men who are very stressed out and a lot of burnout. There's some great research out there on this about how work and family or work and life integration, however it's been, work family conflicts, another way it's been termed, how that when that's measured for men, we see that with fathers especially, and it rises up to the top of the list in many cases of creating stress and burnout in the workplace for men,
Mm,
right? And this is something that we've
mm,
talked about with women for a long time, and
mm,
now we're talking about it with men because at least with women, I think the one side of this has been that, okay, when we have flex work arrangements, when we have parental leave or maternity leave, obviously everybody expects moms to take care of that, right? They're going to do that.
mm,
They're going to take advantage of those things and do those because that's expected. they're also going to be penalized for them, right? That's already baked into the system, that's baked into the structure of the work. But when men or dads try to do these things, it's like, oh, no, 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 no. That's for moms, that's for women. That I know we said we have that policy, but that no, you're really not going to do that. You're really not going to take that. I'm not going to allow you to do that. It's like, well, wait a minute. What's the point of having the policy if we can't have access to it? We can't use it. And many cases, managers look at it and go, well, I don't know how to implement it, and so therefore I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah. And I love that description at the start there. Fair share for women at work in terms of pay, in terms of opportunity, in terms of meaningful work, and fair share for men to open up their lives for what might happen if they could have their fair share at home, and then what the workplace needs to do to support that. And it's something that I've been an executive coach for 7 years now, working with mums and dads, and what I've realized is what happens at home has a massive impact on what's going to happen at work. And I don't think that link is there before you have kids. I think you can kind of power on quite well. And I think we need to, I think with any workplace, if we want workplace shift in equity or fair share, we have to look at what's happening at home, because my line is, women can do anything, but we can't do everything. Yeah. And, I feel like society sent women a memo that they can break into the boardroom, but it never sent men a memo that they can break into the home. Yeah. And I think until we fix that, I don't know how there's going to be. Yeah. I don't know how there's going to be change for our children and even their children.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I've got another tricky question, which is, how do we engage men on this topic? Like, I really loved your thought in the book around, well, you've got to be clear on what's in it for me, and how it can build their personal brand. But I feel like many resources in this area target women, like even like I love fair play, but I feel like the mum buys it and and maybe gets the dad to read it. Like, what do we need to be doing differently for dads to be buying books or attending a webinar or actively listening to this podcast? Like, how do we engage men in this work?
Yeah, boy, that's another $1 million question, Emma.
I know.
There's so much. There's so much to it. No, but we can. Let's just offer some of the best practices we see. Number one, let's talk about what's not working and what hasn't been working forever, and that involves making gender fairness just about a program for women or something we're doing for women. You see this in workplaces where the only progress on gender fairness happens, through the women's ERG, right? An unfunded entity of women who have all the responsibility for bringing attention to gender equity in the organization. And then the other part of that is suggesting to women that they have to pretzel themselves or fix themselves to kind of fit into this archaic workplace. And usually you'll see that in the form of women's leadership programs or women's mentoring programs, which are great. We know a lot of really excellent ones, but they can send the message to men that this is a women's issue. Let women go off and fix themselves, and then they can come back and make themselves compatible with our traditional workplace. So we haven't included men effectively because of that messaging. And let's also just point out, often when men hear about gender or, are asked to attend an event related to gender in their company, it's often some siloed, mandatory compliance-based training around sexual harassment or implicit bias. But there's nothing affirmative. There's nothing invitational. We're not showing men what's in it for you, as you said, when you're a better inclusive leader. Right? And there's a lot of evidence that men who are more inclusive, who lead with emotional intelligence, have more opportunity for advancement at work. And then let's show men what's in it for them when they're more engaged at home, right? Better relationships with their partner, with their children, deeper engagement on a sustained emotional level with your children that you wouldn't otherwise have, a healthier brain. Dave and I included some of the research from Darby Saxby, who's got a great new book out called Dad Brain. We cover a little bit of that in Fair Share. Men who are more engaged at home have more neuroplasticity. They have younger looking brains. So there is a lot in aggregate in this for men, but we haven't framed it that way for them. It's all been about, hey, get your act together, don't harass women. Yeah, and that kind of messaging is not really getting us where we want to be.
Yeah, Emma, I think the other part of this is, and this is kind of there's a little bit of a sad story that goes with this, but one of the challenges we have in engaging men in this conversation is they often don't have a personal connection to it. Or if they do have a personal connection, they're just not thinking about it in that same way. And so, for example, we include a few examples in the book about how these senior C-suite leaders who suddenly became great advocates for caregiving policy, practices, shifting the workplace after something very traumatic had probably happened in their lives. And for one example in there was around this C-suite executive who his partner, his wife, had cancer. She died obviously very quickly and unexpectedly, leaving him as the primary caregiver, which he was not before when she was alive, to his two young daughters. And now it's just him and his daughters. And suddenly he's been thrust into this world where he has to do it all. And now he's like, wow, this work doesn't really work for me anymore in the way that I want it to. So I'm going to change. I'm not going to leave the workplace. I'm going to change the workplace so that it works for me. And oh, by the way, now I have this empathy for all of these people in my workplace who have caregiving responsibilities that, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to before, but now I do because I have this connection to it. And so we often find, people ask, where do I start? Do I start with the business case or about why this is great for my organization? And we often say, no, actually start with that personal connection. Find the example in that person's life, in their family, maybe somebody at work, somebody in the workplace that he knows, right? That you can share. It's like, hey, did you realize that she had this going on in her family and she's having to do this or he's having to do this? And they're contending with this and they're like, no, I had no idea. It's like, because today people cover their caregiver identity. They cover their responsibilities. They cover all their needs because they're afraid. They're fearful that they're going to lose their job or that they're not going to get an opportunity that they really need, right? And everybody needs those opportunities to continue to grow in their careers and bring home that paycheck that is so important for us getting there and to continue doing work that's meaningful to us. So often it's that personal connection that happens in these men's lives, these senior leaders' lives.
I love that. Find the personal connection. And Brad, I loved your point. This has to be affirmative action. I think a lot of the initiatives they're almost deficit thinking or it's all terrible, like try to make it a tiny bit better. And as you were talking, Brad, and you were talking about affirmative action, and it makes me think that there's some companies in New Zealand that have done have really great strategies around AI adoption for their workforce, and they've been putting out these company-wide, like amazingly affirmative, what can we do? How can we make life better for us, for our customers? Why don't we do that? You know what I mean? Like it's looking, because it's a business lever as well, just like AI is.
Yeah.
And I don't see this affirmative action. I do see it's like, oh, we have to go to this workshop.
Yeah.
And it's like, not that I didn't mean to do a voice like that, but do you know what I mean? Like,
your dude voice needs some work. Yeah. No, I agree, and closely related to what you're saying, Emma. I think that men only hear messaging when it comes to including more women in leadership. They only hear that as quota, or boy, if we invite more women in, I'm going to lose somehow, which then provokes zero-sum thinking in a lot of men who, and that's the wrong frame. No, if we include more women, we're going to be more successful. Our company is going to grow. You're going to have more opportunity as a result of that. So we're not messaging it the right way.
We're so not messaging it the right way. And I recall a conversation with a client that was, I didn't work with them. They were a large logistics company, and they very highly male dominated business. And in my initial meeting with this head of operations, he said the quiet thing out loud. And it's what we don't hear a lot of the time. And while I was kind of shocked with it, I was also like really grateful that he said it out loud, because I feel like we need to give space for men to talk the things that are living in their heads out loud. And what he said to me was, he goes, "You know what, Emma? I really like you, because when it comes to woman stuff, like menopause and pay gap and maternity leave, it just feels so problem focused. But you talk about solutions." And I just really love that he felt safe enough to say that, because I feel like I feel like a lot of senior leader men might think that. And, we need to actually get this stuff out on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Make it okay to talk about.
Totally. I've got a specific question, which is in your book, and again, I really recommend it to everyone. You have a lot of practical ideas of how you can change the workplace. And one of them was this idea of calling out sludge, which is a great term. And what you mean by that is when colleagues make comments about someone leaving at 4:45 p.m. or having to pick up the work of a parent that's got a sick kid, that people make these under your breath type comments, or they'll make, "Oh, it's nice for some. Oh, enjoy your day off," or, things like that. And you think it's really important to call out sludge. I'm wondering, how do you do that in a way that people learn, as opposed to making people feel targeted when you say, "Oh, that's not a nice thing to say"? Like if you're sitting next to someone and they've said when the person's left the building, "Oh God, it's nice for them. Like they get to leave, we have to stay here." What would we say to call out that sludge that doesn't make that person feel targeted?
That's a great question. And I think because it does kind of have this obviously negative connotation to it if we're calling it out and we're kind of reprimanding somebody for doing it. To me, I always like to flip the script a little bit and talk about, so why are they leaving early, and what allowed them to do that. And so that gets to this results only work environment, and recognizing that, hey, you know what? If we were half as efficient as she was, or he was in this case, we could be going home right now, or we could be doing these things as well. And that's one of the things I think it's really interesting is you look at a lot of time with parents who have, again, really heavy caregiving responsibilities, but it could also be, in many cases today, we see a lot with this kind of sandwich generation too, right? Where they have both children they're caring for at the same time with parents. And this is happening more and more for even aging and adult men who are having to care for their aging parents today, and getting kind of back into this whole awareness and understanding and connection into the work. But recognize that I have to become more efficient at my job, and I'm not going to have time for the sludge of all these other things that are going on, of having the other, and I mean, some people are kind of a little bit looking back on it as kind of like, oh, well, we're not getting to do these, little time in the break room and the time at the water cooler and, getting to do these other things. It's like, well, but the world's busy, right? And we're moving faster than ever, I feel like, today. And so you have to kind of keep up with that. And so part of that is becoming more efficient in the workplace. If you're going to prioritize doing your caregiving responsibility and performing at a really high level at work, right? We don't have time for the rest of it. We don't have time for the sludge and the part that's really not productive, the non-productive parts of the workplace. And that's where this is just an artifact of presenteeism, right? All the face time, that again, a lot of the 20th century workplace was really founded on this. And they kind of fall back on, well, it was about relationship building. It was about team building. It was about getting to know people. And it's like, well, there was some of that in there, but somehow we continue to do that today. But we can do it in a way that doesn't eat up all of our time. We don't have to spend, 18 hours a day in the workplace, physically there present. We can actually do it in a very different way.
Yeah.
And Emma, I love two strategies Dave and I call out in the book to kind of immediately address what you brought up. How do I confront that? One would be a Socratic question. Just help me understand why it matters where she's sitting today, when she does her work. I'm not sure there's any correlation between the quality of her work and where she happens to be working. So ask a Socratic question. Usually doesn't make people so defensive. The other option is to give a personal example. I took last Friday off to get caught up on a project I'm working on. I made so much headway because I didn't have other distractions. So I was really able to contribute to our joint product by having that time, kind of closed off. So give a personal illustration about why this is useful. But, there are all kinds of ways I can change minds about this.
I love it. We need you to change our minds, Brad. So I love that. I think leading with a question and sharing a personal example, again, this personal connection thing is so good. It's so good. I think if we could always respond with questions, I think life would be better, actually, rather than you're wrong, I'm right, finished.
Yeah.
I think it's powerful. Final question for you both. This podcast is called How to Smash the Motherhood Penalty, because I really wanted to give my audience practical ideas, which you guys have so generously offered. But we know the motherhood penalty is created through system levers, right? And if I gave you both a magic wand, right? You've all got a magic wand. You're basically Oprah. What would you use it for? What do you think's the biggest lever that you would smash to smash the motherhood penalty? Like what would you use your magic wand for that you think that would have a massive difference to smashing the motherhood penalty? And I'm going to start with David. What would you use your magic wand for, my friend?
I've got two, so I'll give one, and Brad, you'll probably pick up the other one.
Okay, all right.
They're big ones. And the first one is, again, maybe it may not be so obvious in the connection, but it's about having, and this is something we suffer from more so in the United States than in many other countries because we don't have this social safety net out there. But it's about childcare. It's about paid childcare, universal childcare, and starting from, for infants, right, of having that available after parents come off of parental leave, right, of having that immediately available options that are affordable to you so that you can go back to work and you can have access to that. And we don't have to worry about those things. And that immediately begins to change behavior. It changes the practices that we have. And suddenly, a lot of these, because a lot of the challenge with the motherhood penalty has been around occupational segregation. It's also because pushing women into particular kinds of roles that are typically more part-time roles. That again, it's there because are flexible roles because they need to have access to care and caregiving and childcare. And if we had universal access there, that would change everything in many ways, I think, for women, and it would begin to move the needle when it comes to different wage penalties like the motherhood penalty.
Okay, do I get my magic wish now?
No, you get a magic wand.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, I love David's. Here's mine, and it involves degendering care. And here's one big solution to getting us to degendering care. If companies made caregiving leave of any kind, including childbirth, adoption, elder care, doesn't matter, made it mandatory, meaning, hey, we have 6 months of paid leave, you have to take it all, and it's degendered, so both men and women have got to take their full leave. If we could get to that sort of strategy, we would very quickly degender care. It would no longer be a mother's program. There wouldn't be the steady motherhood penalty that we're seeing right now. This is just something that all employees do. We all have access to it. My manager assumes I'm going to take my full amount. There's no conversation about that. So all the programs designed to support people going on any kind of caregiving leave are gender neutral. and they're assumptive, they're automatic. If we can get to that, I think we very quickly help to mitigate the motherhood penalty.
Oh, powerful, powerful. Childcare, universal, accessible, affordable / free childcare. I mean, I see childcare as infrastructure.
It is.
You know, it's a sign. It's a sign that our society does not value caregiving, that it is not seen as infrastructure. So support that. And degendering care, making it all your parental policies, degendering them, you know, making it mandatory is so powerful. And I think that that idea, Brad, links with something David said about personal connection, right? Like when that dad lost his wife and had to do it all, you get it quite quickly, don't you? You really, like, no one likes being told what to do, but when you're in it, so if we have dads who return to work after 6 months, feeling a bit weird, wondering if someone's going to do a handover for them, this stuff will all change at work. When we have dads that are come back on 4 days a week and have their salary prorated to 80%, but are still delivering 100% of the job, that will change. You know, we actually need all these experiences to be experienced by all the genders. So, yeah. I love that. I love those magic wands. Can I come and live in your world when we have those magic wands?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Brad and David. Thank you for investing your time. Thank you for your voices. So powerful to hear male voices and white men voices on this stuff. I want to acknowledge that and say thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being good ancestors. And I have really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks for including us, Emma.
This podcast was funded by Works for Everyone, a business that is dedicated to supporting working parents and to smashing the motherhood penalty. If this is also your jam, let's stay connected. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for us, Works for Everyone. And if you want more information on how we help businesses put a care wrap around their employees, check us out on worksforeveryone.co.nz. Or if none of these work for you, in the weekends you can find me, Emma McLean, the founder of Works for Everyone, in the queue at Pack and Save Royal Oak or Kmart St Luke's. Onwards!